welcome to Kellogg College. Welcome to the Global Centre on Healthcare and Urbanisation public seminar series. It's great to see so many of you here this evening. My name is Juliet Carpenter. I'm Director of Research at the GCHU. And we're delighted to welcome you to this, our fourth in our year of public seminar. It's a seminar series that runs every year twice a term in weeks 1 and week 8. And the format of the seminars is that we try and take a topical issue. We ask 4 speakers to come and give their presentation of a pitch to the topical question, and we open it up to the floor. So we'll have 5 minutes of speeches from the speakers, and then we'll have Q&A and very much open to a discussion with the audience, either to particular panellists or more generally. And the seminar topic this evening is going to be transport inequalities. And transport lies really at the very heart of everyday experiences in the city, but it brings many challenges. And so today, what we're asking is, how can cars, public transport and active travel work together? How do current approaches to transport, how can they reduce or do they increase inequalities? And so I'm delighted to present the 4 speakers today who are going to give their pitch on these questions to help us to critically interrogate these issues around transport inequalities. So first up, I'd like to introduce Sarah Leeming, who is Regional Director for the South of England at Sustrans, which is a national charity that's focusing on walking, wheeling and cycling. Next we'll have Marion, who is Managing Director of the Oxford Bus Company. And you may know that the Oxford Bus Company is currently rolling out one of the biggest fleets of electric buses outside London, in Oxford, so no doubt we'll hear a little bit more about that. We have Plyushteva, who is a researcher at Oxford University at the Transport Studies Unit, based at the School of Geography, and her particular interests are urban mobility, infrastructures and economies in the city. And then we have Pete Brunskill, who is Principal Rail Development Planner at Oxfordshire County Council, and so he's bringing the county's perspective on rail, on buses, on public transport in general, and active travel from the county perspective. So we've got this range of different approaches, different perspectives on the question of transport inequalities, which we're going to hear from now and then open up to the floor. So thank you very much. Thank you to the speakers, and Sarah, if I can hand over to you, please.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone. So 5 minutes, okay, I'll try my best. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and thanks for the introduction. So yes, I work for Sustrans. We're a national organisation. We're making it easier for people to walk, wheel and cycle. So I'm going to give my perspective more from an active travel viewpoint. I'm going to respond to the questions posed through the lens of young people in particular, because Sustrans recently published a report called Transport to Thrive, so I'm going to talk about that. I'll address the first question more directly and suggest some solutions to the second question towards the end. So, Transport to Thrive. The report is the first of its kind for an age group between 16 and 24. So there's been little research to identify and understand the transport issues and barriers experienced by young people. So that's what the research set out to do. The project worked with a panel of young advisors to ensure lived experience informed its research design and recommendations. And we also obviously looked at national travel data as well to see what that was telling us. So in the UK, many disadvantaged groups lack transport choices, including young people. This can impact on their ability to access education, work-life opportunities, and also, leading to effects on their health and well-being. So let's have a look at their findings. So the key overarching finding is that we need to improve transport for young people. Transport policy is leaving young people behind as they enter adulthood. Between the ages of 16 and 24, young people go through life-defining experiences and changes. We have many people young people in the room today. So most of you will aim to move through education into employment, leave a family home and become more independent. So our research found that young people make fewer trips than any other age group. In 2019, 16 to 24-year-olds made 21% fewer trips compared to working age adults of 25 to 64 years. This gap has widened over the past 20 years and is most likely to affect young people from disadvantaged groups, including people of colour, people from low-income households and disabled people. So we found the likelihood of a young person having a low level of mobility depends on their employment status, household income and car access. So lower levels of mobility are connected to difficulties in accessing and using transport. This has become more widely studied in other groups, for example, disabled people, and you've probably heard this referred to as the transport accessibility gap. The National Transport Investment and Policy decisions have prioritised private motor vehicles. However, only 40% of young people have a full driving licence in comparison to 74% of adults aged 16 or over, and only 28% of the main driver of a car in comparison to 47% of adults. This means that many young people rely on buses, walking and cycling. Bus services, however, have been cut over many years, and networks for safe cycling where people are protected from motor vehicles do not exist in most parts of the UK. This can limit the ability of many young people to access services, education and work opportunities. Young people are more likely to travel using a range of transport options, including public transport, walking, cycling and shared mobility like e-scooters. So young people can do the most to enable the government to meet its net zero targets. They are the age group who recognise the need to reduce car use and use more sustainable modes. So what do I recommend? We need to ensure that the needs of young people are recognised in transport planning. Young people are often ignored in transport planning alongside other disadvantaged groups. Local and national governments should act to ensure that young people and their lived experience informs transport policy and practice. We need to support more research with young people to understand the factors that influence their transport decisions and the potential for reduced car use through car delay or avoidance and new models of car use like car sharing. We need to provide long-term dedicated investment for walking, cycling and public transport. Most transport investment in the UK is spent, as we know, on long-distance roads or rail improvements. We need to change this to invest more in local transport policy options and local investment in local transport. So free or low-cost bus fares and subsidised rail travel for young people. Obviously, the £2 rail fares is having a profound impact on the usage of our bus network, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that soon. We need to create safe and accessible walking, wheeling and cycling infrastructure which young people are more likely to use. We need to provide financial support to young people who are unable to access a cycle to work scheme or to be able to purchase a cycle for themselves. We need to help young people to walk, cycle, use public transport and use shared mobility. Support must be provided to young people through improvements to transport policy and programmes that give them genuine transport choices to access the things they need to live well. UK governments and devolved governments should devolve powers to local transport authorities to take greater control of buses, setting routes and minimum service levels, including for frequency and reliability. Provide local transport authorities with powers to introduce single ticketing systems, multimodal journeys, including trains, trams, buses and micromobility options. We need to offer cycle training to every UK child to ensure young people have the skills and confidence to cycle. We need to introduce legislation and guidance for e-scooters to ensure safety, inclusive access and support reduced car use. Take action to ensure car share schemes better meet the needs of young people as well. So in summary, young people need to be given genuine transport choices to ensure transport no longer holds them back. Changes will also benefit especially other disadvantaged groups. At the heart of this is improving active travel and public transport in parallel to support multimodal, low-car lifestyles. If we can get it right, then there are multiple benefits for young people, wider society and the economy. Probably more than 5 minutes, sorry.
Lots of things to think about for the questions. I'm sure we'll have some echoes in the other presentations as well. Luke, I wonder if you could come to the podium.
Hello everyone, I'm Marion. My profession is that I am a bus operator, in fact a long-term bus operator, so not really sure what that says about me, but yes, I'm a bus operator. So public transport, good public transport is a force for good. It's good for physical health. Bus journeys are active travel journeys. Every bus journey starts with a walk, quite often finishes with a walk. It may start with a cycle, or it may finish with a cycle. So, and research has found that people who commute by bus or train accumulate 20 to 28 minutes of active exercise a day, more than people who don't. And that's getting towards that goal of Public Health England's 30 minutes of moderate activity a day, 5 times a week. And a third of adults don't manage that. So public transport's can be a really, really good thing for your physical health. It can also be good for mental health. More than 13% of people in the UK feel lonely every day. Research has found that social isolation, loneliness increases mortality. And people in the UK have chosen to take the bus just to have some physical contact with people. 37% of people who've taken the bus say they've done that, and they've spoken to people that just met for the first time. And 2/3 of bus users say they think that buses create strong community ties. So buses can be a real force for community and removing isolation and poor mental health in the city. It's good for the planet. So even with diesel buses, the incremental CO2 produced from an traditional journey is very, very small. Embedded carbon is a massive thing within cars, because your car's got to be produced, it's got to be disposed of. Even with an electric car, that's very, very high relative to the point of the carbon use at the point of use. And the new electric fleet that we've got in the picture there in Oxford is charged wholly by renewable sources, produces no tailpipe emissions. So buses are a force and good for the environment as well. And crucially, they're good for the city. Buses are the most efficient users of road space. We remove unnecessary congestion, free up more room in the city for all the good things you want to see, like pavement cafes and events and all that kind of good stuff, and also free up room for active travel and cycling and walking. KPMG found in research that areas with good bus services empirically suffer from less deprivation than areas that don't have such good bus services. So having a good bus service is something that helps bring a neighbourhood out of deprivation. In terms of what do we need to deliver good public transport, and what are the ingredients to make it work? The first thing is obviously finance. We need capital funds. It's by depots, by vehicles, ticket machines, other equipment. The electric bus projects in Oxford, we invested 31 million of our own funds in that. So capital is required. Operating funds are also required. We've got to employ the workforce in good quality jobs. We've got to clean the vehicles, we've got to maintain the vehicles, we've got to power them, either diesel or electric. We've got to make sure we're insured. And crucially, we've got to make sure we can afford the brains trust to work with local partners and stakeholders to make sure we keep growing, keep improving, keep learning from things around us and making changes. We've also got to have targeted third-party support, because no matter what kind of structure you have in terms of funding bus services, running bus services, there's going to be journeys that aren't so well used. But they need to be there for maybe social reasons, they might need to be there for economic reasons. They might not be commercially viable on their own, so we need some funding for those targeted bits of the network, either from councils, from housing developers, from large employers. We've got all three of that in Oxfordshire, and it helps us deliver the wider network that we're able to deliver and make the whole thing stack up. And then finally, at the moment, there's a fourth box of funding, which we referred to in the previous presentation, keeping the fares down. We've got more capped to £2 at the moment. £2 fare in the city isn't particularly massively attractive. It's quite attractive if you're going all the way to Reading. But what is the right level of fares on bus services? Price elasticity varies between age groups, but really it's 0.7, 0.8, something like that. So is it the right thing to be throwing loads of money into fares, or should we be putting money into more into coverage, frequency, and some of the other things that we're spoken about? As well as finance, we need stable and supported policy. The tectonic plates of policy have been moving around quite a lot since the pandemic, and we've been hopping from one to the other and kind of making sure that the network's there for people who need it. We're growing back and giving everything the best chance to recover that we can. There are things like concessionary fares, there's fuel duty rebate, there's also been COVID recovery funding. The national bus strategy kind of overarches all of this. It's quite positive in its intent, a lot of good stuff in there, and some funding has been released from that, but it's been quite uneven. There's been some areas of the country got nothing, some areas of the country got massive amounts and they're struggling to spend it, and maybe some of the allocations between capital and revenue aren't really where they need to be either. As well as central government policy, we need local planning policy to work for us. We need to direct development towards existing public transport corridors. We need to feed routes that are already viable to get that virtuous circle going, increase frequency, more patronage, etc., etc. And we also need to have that planning to provide the housing to the people who are going to run the bus network. We employ 900 people in our business, and housing in Oxfordshire has never been tougher really than it is at the moment. We are struggling with that. and you know, we can't have a bus service without staff. And finally, local highways policy is really important as well. We need the buses to run efficiently. You know, there's only so many buses we can operate. We haven't got limited depots, we've got limited vehicles. The buses need to run, they need to move without necessary delays, and to do that, they can be a viable option for people to take them where they want to go in the journey time budget that they've got. And if we don't do that, you know, if there's any bus services we like, people won't use them. So that's really important. And then finally, partnership working, really, really important. As a bus operator, my main aim is to listen to the local community, whether that be customers, whether that be employees, local businesses, local government stakeholders, understand what's going on, what the demand drivers are, what the pressures are that exist in the area, and try and make sure we provide the right services to deliver that. And quite often I can be a conduit to kind of connect two different bits of demand together to make the whole thing better than it could be if anyone was doing it on their own. And that's something that I really take a lot of time on. Responding to change, demand doesn't stand still, change is constant. Buses operate in a dynamic world, and it's important to understand what's going on in the real world. We don't see so much from the office. We've got to get out there, understand what's happening on our services and respond and make adjustments before it's too late. Focusing on outcomes is really important. It's really good to have electric buses, but if they don't make the service better, if they make the service worse because it's more expensive, that's not a good thing. We've got to have a wider plan to make the bus service better for everyone, and if electric buses are part of that, that's great. But you know, I'm more interested in making sure that we've got a plan, we know where we're going, and we're building up towards something. And then finally, I think there's a lot of chat about how bus services are organised in the country. We spend ages in this country talking about public transport, should it be publicly owned, should it be privately owned, what should the private sector do, what should the public sector do. Personally, I don't really care. I just think each part needs to do what they're good at. That's the key thing. And you know, councils generally, they're really good at planning, they're good at setting policies, they're good at balancing needs of different groups, they're good at making sure no one's left behind. They're not so good at managing costs, they're not so good at innovating, they're not so good at growing commercial revenue. The private sector is generally better at that. The private sector can bring extra capital as well. We can invest in things if we think there's a business case there. So I think working in partnership and everyone doing what they're good at is really, really important. And there's a lot, we need to kind of move the debate on from kind of high level stuff of who plans and organises buses into who are the best people to do this job, and let's get the best people on the best, on the right tasks. So that's everything from me. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Real interesting, fascinating insight into the buses in Oxford and the challenges being faced. Anna, would you like to come, please?
Thank you for the invitation. This pitch is also about public transport, arguably from a slightly different angle. My point of departure today is an ongoing collaboration with Sharon Francis, my co-investigator, who is based at Jacobs, a transport consultancy, and Lancashire County Council. And in this project, we're looking to understand whether and how a particular public transport scheme, the Pennine Reach Rapid Bus Link between Blackburn, Down and Accrington, has affected an area that experiences profound social inequality and many forms of deprivation as well. But our aim is not only to evaluate this specific project, but more broadly to develop new approaches for understanding how new public transport schemes affect inequalities. The tools that are currently used for this purpose within transport appraisal are extremely limited. This is because of, on one hand, the complexity of understanding something like inequalities, but on the other hand, also due to the way inequalities have not been a policy priority and a priority in appraisal the way, for example, economic growth has been. So there are two key points in how we approach this challenge as part of this project. First, we understand transport disadvantage is produced at the intersection of different aspects of one's social identity, so gender, age, disability, sexuality, race and ethnicity, income, class, and so on. For the most part, research has examined kind of simplified, very much singular aspects of people's social identities. Do low-income people cycle in this town? Can women access employment opportunities? This is not always helpful when it comes to evaluation. The public transport experiences of an older person with high income will be very different to the experiences of an older person with a low income. The barriers faced by a British Pakistani young man who also has caring responsibilities will be distinctive to those faced by a white Polish young man coolies with chronic pain. So if we can't assume that all women and all older people or all ethnic minorities are disadvantaged, transport disadvantaged in the same way, we should evaluate the impact of transport schemes on different forms of disadvantage and arguably start with those cases where multiple forms of disadvantage coalesce. The second point is that, unlike most research on inequality, we don't limit ourselves to a focus on disadvantage. As all research inspired by intersectional feminist perspectives, we don't see disadvantage as occurring in a vacuum. We think it only makes sense in relation to something else, and that something else is not the absence of disadvantage, it is privilege. For us, the distinction rides on whether someone relies on a single option for their trips or whether they have access to alternatives. If the bus doesn't turn up, can you still make it to your hospital appointment by ordering a taxi on your smartphone app without dipping into your food budget, for example? If your car breaks down, is there proper pavement along the road so you can push the pram safely all the way to the nursery? For people who have a backup option or multiple backup options, we consider them to be relatively transport privileged. Here, privilege does not mean being part of an elite or having access to some kind of exclusive privilege, no. It is about being in the relatively advantageous position of knowing that when you need to make a journey, there will be a range of ways to make it, even if one option is temporarily unavailable. And in terms of evaluation, we want to understand the impact of the scheme on these groups too. And why is that? I come to the first question set by the organizers: how can cars, public transport, and active transport work together? And the truth is that in practice, at the scale of an individual street or a neighborhood, they rarely do and they rarely can. We are dealing with finite road space, finite budgets, not to mention the finite planetary resources that transport gobbles up. So when investments are made, we need to be able to understand whether these investments serve the people who have no or few options, or whether they're for those who already have many. Which brings me to the second question of today, and this is my final point: do transport policies reduce or increase inequalities in cities? The reason why we are undertaking this project in Blackburn is because actually we need better tools to be able to answer that question. For very many transport policies and transport schemes, we still can't provide a very good answer to that question. And we should be able to. Thank you very much.
Sanna, and thanks for the insights into your research, obviously filling gaps in our understanding of transport inequalities. So thanks very much for that. Pete, would you like to?
Right, I've got 3 slides, should take about 6 minutes. So, Pete Brunskill, Oxfordshire County Council, I'm the rail officer at the moment. I've worked with Leeming quite a bit the last couple of years on the electric buses, and my professional background many years ago was originally in city planning and urban design, so I'm basically interested in people and places and environment. So here's one of Luke's lovely new buses, electric. So the total investment was £84 million. We've got this new blue and green livery, which is going to be more of a standard for the city. And he's not really sold enough of the benefits of them because they have 2 full wheelchair spaces, which is the first time ever in the county. They have induction loops, they have lots of features for people who may be having more challenges. So this is our tagline which we use, which our members ask us to use, which is a greener, fairer, healthier county, and let's hope we can do that. So we do live in a diverse county of around 725,000 residents. Obviously, buildings like this, we've got key centres of international learning, massive healthcare facilities, manufacturing, BMW, Mini, for instance. So there are 9 overarching council policies, priorities, and I think the top 3 are tackling the climate emergency, addressing inequalities and focusing on improving health and well-being. However, around 19% of that population, our population, have a disability of some sort. The most common impairment types are social, behavioural for children and mobility for adults. Significant pockets of deprivation do exist in East Oxford, some villages across the county and parts of Banbury. I mean, this is obviously something we've discussed at these seminars before. obesity, hygienic environments, poor air quality, lower levels of public transport provision, and limited accessibility are unfortunately concentrated in our most socially disadvantaged communities. We've got the local transport and connectivity plan, which is our overarching sort of document really on transport, and we've got very ambitious targets on modal shift, sustainable transport and improving air quality. So headline ones are that by 2030, which doesn't seem far away, we'll have 1 in 4 less car journeys, and by 2030, 1 in 3 less. And that's as the population of the county grows. We've got targets around Vision Zero, so making sure we don't have sort of road fatality. So it's all very ambitious. So bus-wise, we've worked with Luke and other partners on the Zebra electric bus initiative. We did quite well in securing money from the government from the bus service improvement plan. And we've got an enhanced partnership. So that means the substantial investment in the bus network county-wide. So I am the rail officer at the moment, so Oxfordshire is planned for rail, and this basically just shows that Oxford, where we are tonight, is at the heart of the national rail network. So it's critical for Britain. We need the railways to carry more passengers and freight, and that comes back to some of those targets I told you about getting people to drive less. So public transport has to take a massive shift on that. We're currently working on a new document called Oxrail 2040, which is an ambitious plan for delivery, and we're looking at a whole range of issues like electrification of the railway, providing additional capacity, making other improvements. You've obviously all seen the work underway at Oxford Railway Station, £200 million, brand new bridge with lots of tracks, a new platform 5, other new connections, very substantial active travel improvements. Cowley, and I was asked to mention Cowley Plus, so we're working with the City Council and Network Rail to try and open 2 passenger rail stations on the freight-only BMW line. I've travelled back from that eastern part of the city, and it can take an hour on the bus. Sorry to leave here, but the reality is with the new railway, it would be 9 and 7 minutes from Cowley and Littlemore to take you into central Oxford, but the trains won't stop there. They will go on to London Marion, they will go on to Bletchley via the new West Main Line. So a massive boost in terms of giving people in one of the more disadvantaged areas of the city the opportunity to access work, leisure, social relationships. East West Rail Services, we're talking to the company. It's looking like summer 2025, maybe September when these will start. So brand new connectivity, 2 trains per hour to get to Milton Keynes. I know, having been for a region recently, it's not an easy place to get to unless you drive, so that will be great. And obviously we'll eventually go into Cambridge, and the budget this afternoon announced funding for the link to Bedford. North Cotswold Line partnership, quite key. We have trains running from London to Worcester through some of our more rural communities, but stations like Hanborough are very important. I've just mentioned a number of stations here. We're working with the industry to make more improvements at Didcot Boundary Column, and we're doing a business case study for a new station at Grove to support growth there. I've put this in bold. The reality is, as we said, people maybe in more challenging backgrounds do suffer disproportionately for issues around air quality, noise pollution. Obviously the electric buses solve that in Oxford, but decarbonisation and climate resistance are key challenges that must be tackled. And sorry, I've just focused on this, and I see your hand raised in your audience. So this is the bit that really excites me away from the technical side. So yes, we're doing a lot of work on integration, and we're developing a network of mobility hubs, and active travel links and buses are key to supporting rail in that. I just wanted to focus in the end here on the Oxfordshire Community Rail Partnership, which was launched in this last year, and we've been working very closely with them. It's funded by the rail industry, by the companies and by ourselves. They're a force for good. They really are sort of outreach. So they do active travel mapping, they prepare the maps of local communities in Didcot, Banbury, Bicester North. They do a lot of work around public health, which is why I'm mentioning tourism support, station adoption groups, volunteering. The 2 I wanted to mention, and here's an artist's impression, the Cotswold Calm Corner. So we're working with Hannah and the Oxfordshire Community Rail Partnership team and the industry to try and introduce this facility at Oxford Station, either in the current eastern entrance or in the new western entrance. And this is essentially if you're a person who had issues around neurodivergency or other such things, you got to the station, you suddenly felt a bit overwhelmed, you would have this facility to go and sit in and be supported. So we're very keen on this. So I know it's not the technical sort of, county council side, but we are very keen on this. And Getaways, I do want to mention, so they've been running this year, most recently in the last half term. Elaine, who's one of the community rail people, took 36 young people from Blackbird Leys out in 3 different groups over a number of days. And these are sort of, 11, 16-year-olds who, and I must admit, I've read the feedback and I got quite emotional. I mean, they've never been to Oxford railway station. They've never been on a train before. They've never been to the Oxfordshire countryside before. And I've been sent all the sort of feedback and had to get some of my younger colleagues to help me with it, because apparently the journeys were well sick, which apparently means very good. And you sort of read this and you think, this really is a challenge that most of us haven't faced. Or you can charge your phone on the train. Well, obviously the younger people wouldn't have known that because they've never been on a train before. So I think it just shows how transport can have a human face, and hopefully does tackle the topic tonight around inequality.
Thanks very much, Pete, and great to see all the initiatives that are coming out of the community related to all various aspects of transport inequalities. Right, I wonder if I could open it up now to the floor for comments, questions, either to an individual speaker or to the panel as a whole. If you'd like to say your name and any affiliation you have, that'd be great.
Hello, I'm John Sanders. I was chair of Oxfordshire County Council, and I was opposition spokesman on transport. On a question, many questions I've got from excellent speakers, but one that struck me was something I hadn't considered before, was the effect of transport on young people, which your first speaker was sensitive on. And I'm really interested to know if what people's experience is of the difference between young people's attitude to the new innovations, LTMs, bus gates, that sort of thing, and older people. My suspicion is that all the people who object are going to be old people, and the young people are dead set in favour of it. And the only people who are a bit iffy about it are probably bus companies.
Well, over to the panel. There's a microphone here. Who'd like to? Yeah.
I mean, I think probably something for Lee to say about bus
I'll do that
companies.
one.
I mean, from our perspective, and I'm now moving into the later age range, so understand some of those issues. Although I don't have a car and I walk and use the bus and the train. I mean, younger people, and that's why I focus it on my last slide. I mean, because obviously it's a bit of a obvious statement. They are the future, and I think what we've tended to find with the work we do across the age ranges is you can't generalise. We have a lot of older people resident in Oxford, for instance, who we've met and spoken to at many events, and they're very progressive. They've cycled all their lives. They're very concerned. And yet, you're right. I mean, generally, younger people, certainly most of the ones I've met in recent years, do seem to have a greater understanding of some of the environmental and social challenges we face. And I don't know if it's what happens in the school setting nowadays. Obviously, the county council's quite heavily involved in that. But certainly, a lot of younger people I've spoken to in recent times, and Hannah would probably back this up from the community rail perspective, are very concerned and interested, and consequently are interested in taking different choices. And that's where I guess we need to support them as much as possible, whether it's with cycle training or making investment in infrastructure, rail and bus. I mean, we've all got mixed views. I'm probably a bit closer personally to Luke on ownership models and funding and things. But the reality is, I told you about those very challenging targets at the beginning. I mean, we're told to say they're ambitious. My boss is actually in the audience. Heroic. They're heroic targets, to be honest. So, if we don't bring younger people with us, and to be honest, older members of society, we won't get anywhere.
Challenging is the word.
No, I'd like to take a couple of points on that. I think that what the first one I'd say is before the pandemic, the council had a panel called VOXI, which was made up of young people, teenagers and below, and they did a lot of focus groups and research with them. It was quite interesting. We used it a lot when we were doing the Pick Me Up service. We found that service performed really well with the younger age group. They really took to that. Much more so than some of the older groups, and they saw that something they really valued. So there was definitely an age differential between people's propensity to try innovative different things. In terms of the bus companies and view on LTNs and the bus case, I'll probably do half a day on that, but I'll give you the edited highlights. I mean, really, LTNs and bus gates go hand in glove. You can't have one without the other. And obviously, we're very supportive of the project as a whole because we've invested 30 million quid in new vehicles and depot infrastructure. So we're very supportive of the project. Well, the issue is the timelines really, and what's happened in Oxford because of things outside the county's control. We've had to put the LTNs in by a certain date because of government funding deadlines. We've ended up with a situation where we've made things better for people who can cycle and a hell of a lot worse for people who can't cycle during probably a 2-year period. And that's not great when you're trying to improve the bus service, and it's really not great when you're trying to bring it back from a pandemic. Certainly all the elements need to be there in the mix in the future, and LTNs are very definitely something we want to be doing. The bus gate needs to be an enabler for better public realm of many types and better active travel of many types as well. But yeah, it's all about timing and quite often we can get unintended outcomes and consequences from well-intentioned policies, and that's an example of that writ large, really.
I just have one small thing, but I suspect your suspicions are correct. I mean, I don't have the data in front of me, but Sustrans, we've done now for 4 years, not consecutive years, but we've done 4 lots of what we call the walking and cycling index across 22 cities across the UK. And we now have a tool where you can actually interrogate the data. So, for example, you can interrogate data to understand which demographic or which age category is supportive of measures in their local city. And time again, we see young people supportive of traffic-free routes, for example, supportive of traffic restriction measures, supportive of things like LTN. So as a general rule, the evidence stacks up that young people are supporting these measures.
So give it 50 years, you'll be good.
Thank you for this question. I also don't have data in front of me, but a few years ago I was involved in a report for the Departmental Transport on young people's travel, and what we found was that on one hand, yes, concerns for the environment and the climate crisis and so on are more likely to shape the travel behaviour of younger people, but there is a very strong component of affordability in that as well. Young people are often less likely to drive because they cannot afford to drive a car and to get a driver's license. And of course, if you take a life course perspective on that, then you have to ask the question whether their ability to afford a car will change as they get older, and therefore also their take on some of these things. Sorry for the pessimistic angle on this.
More questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just a quick question. So I'm Nicola, I'm a student here at Oxford. I study social policy, and I have 2 short questions. One of them is about how, so in Oxford, what strikes me is it's such an old city, which makes it just so difficult to increase the capacity for bus rides, for instance. So I'm just wondering, how do you work with that, and what is like the potential to increase the bus capacities to make sure that the bus rides don't take so long? Sometimes, you just mentioned sometimes you're taking an hour to get from actually not so far away to a different place. And my second question is about kind of the connectivity between the villages around Oxford and Oxford. So my cousins live outside of Oxford but work here. But they can't live here because they can't afford it, because they work quite low income jobs. So they're spending like 2 hours a day just on the buses, which leads to, they didn't have the money to live in Oxford, and now they're also losing time every single day. So I'm just wondering if you also look at those kind of inequalities as well. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds like a bus one. So yeah, I guess 100% in terms of the villages point, and that's a really interesting one in terms of when you went the answer I gave to the previous question about the sort of LTNs versus bus gates and that time lag. There has been generally, you're right, that the people who live outside of Oxford and commute in are the ones who can't afford to live there. It's not an exact science, but certainly Oxford has a very, very high house price to average income ratio, and a lot of the housing stock's owned by the university and people like that. So it is a huge importer of labour daily, and I'm one of those people personally. Those are the ones who everyone's got a journey time budget, haven't they, to make their life work. Generally, once your commute starts extending beyond an hour, it's really difficult to make that day stack up and do all the other things you need to get done. And we've seen that with a number of things. I'll give you an example of private schools in Oxford. There's a school called Magdalen College School, Headington School. They've funded a network of 12 coaches at great expense to themselves, actually, to bring people in from villages and hinterlands into their school. And they spend about £1 million a year running that network. But the network isn't as attractive as it needs to be because it takes 70 minutes, 80 minutes, 90 minutes for some of these kids to get to school. So guess what? A lot of them don't use it because it doesn't work within the journey time budget they've got. They instead drive the kids in and drop them off, which obviously becomes a self-defeating situation and makes the thing worse. So that's the sort of challenge we have in Oxford with that kind of stuff, and that's why things like the traffic filters, our project is essential, really, because the bus can take the strain. Bus can carry a lot more people than it does at the moment. If a bus isn't moving, it's not benefiting the city. It's not doing all those good things that I said on the first slide. So buses do need to move. There's a finite number of buses that we're ever going to be able to operate in Oxford, because otherwise we'd need half the city to be a bus depot. So we do need to make sure the buses we've got generate the most good for the city that we can. And if they are able to move them more effectively, at the moment with the electric bus project, there's a 10% improvement target, and that isn't as Herculean as the targets that Pete's talked about in his plan. It's really just returning the running times back to what they were in 2015. We've seen a more than 10% worsening just since 2015 in the running times in the city. So in my time running the buses have been 15% plus faster than they are today, and when they're 15% plus faster, they can carry a lot more people. Even if the buses were full now, which obviously they're not. So there is a lot of potential for bus to take the strain and do more, but bus does need to be able to move and do the things it needs to do to achieve that. And obviously that involves some trade-offs and having less of other types of traffic. That answer your question?
Yeah.
I mean, I could expand as well, talking about taking the pressure, then active travel does stand the potential to take the pressure from the public transport network as well. I think there are opportunities for people to cycle from outlying villages. I've cycled from just near Abingdon today, so I've come along the glorious National Cycle Network, runs along the River Thames. It's quite a lovely green corridor. I don't want to speak on behalf of the county council, but I know they have a plan, or they're trying to formulate a plan to build green cycling corridors into the city. Of course, the challenge is we need the levels of investment from national government to then be able to build these wonderful green corridors that people will use. So I think, it's about levels of investment, and I think that's where we need the big shift to happen.
It's my part there. And one of the key problems is that government and the media are always obsessed with rail. And if we, partly because politicians and journalists tend to travel from London on the rail network, and yet surely in terms of social inclusion, the bus must always be the answer. There's a statistic that's been around for about 30 or 40 years that says 70% the bus journeys are made by the lowest. It's not working. Yeah. 70% of bus journeys are made by the lowest 30% income-wise, and 70% of rail journeys are made by the top 30% income-wise. So buses are the answer. I'm chair of the West Oxfordshire Community Transport that actually runs little minibus services in Whitby and Carterton. And what they do is go into estates and bring people absolutely primarily the elderly into the centre of Whitney and the centre of Carpenter. And the reason those people use the service, often referred to as a lifeline, is because they don't have a car, they can't afford to have a car, and they're on very, very low incomes. So we're called the lifeline by many of them. My question, I suppose, to the panel is that if we are really going to do with social inclusion, what is their solution? What single thing would they do in the first 100 days of government to improve the situation?
Yeah, very good question, Mike. I mean, I think the first point I'd want to emphasise is we're modal agnostic. So whether it's cycling and walking or buses or rail, it's all got its part to play, and yeah, they've all got different sort of solutions to offer. So I mean, I use the bus on a daily basis to travel, so I'm certainly very keen on that. But equally, I'm the rail. So I mean, so at the end of the day, yeah, I don't think we should be pitting these modes against each other. I mean, what we're trying to do is reduce the single occupancy private car use that causes so much congestion and issues. So, I mean, I'll step slightly away from being a county council officer and say that I had a quick look at the budget before I came down this afternoon, and there was yet another freeze on fuel duty. So that's now £100 billion in the last 13 and a half years. So that 240 million for that massive rail improvement sounds great, doesn't it? But what's that? Less than a 20th of it. So I think, the first thing I would like to see in the 100 days of any future government is just a sort of a bit more honesty about what we're trying to do, because, I think when I was born, which, all right, it was a while ago, but I think the population was 50 million. Apparently it's going to head towards 76, 80 million fairly soon. We live in a small damp island. We can't all drive around whenever we want to in our own car if we have access to one. So the reality is, cycling, walking, bus, rail, they've all got a key role to play. And I suppose the final point I'd make is whether it's bus or rail, most people don't use them. We work in the industry, so we just assume it's great, but the reality is most people in Oxfordshire do not use buses or railways. Luke's just given the example there, the excellent services that laid on for the private schools, but because of the time issue, most of the parents end up driving them. So I guess in the first 100 days, I'd like to see a bit more honesty about how we're going to tackle these challenges, because it affects all of us.
Thank you for the question. I do have many things to say on this in relation to devolution of governance and decision making, in relation to funding models which rely on local authorities competing with each other for small pots of money to make ad hoc changes to something that needs to be planned and organised in a much more systemic and long-term way. But I guess if I had to pick one thing, because of the way I think about transport modes as actually competing for finite resources and not kind of systemic change around environmental pressures and inequality not being around improving everything and kind of hoping that people will make changes to their car-dependent lifestyles, I guess a default 20 mile per hour speed limit would be my choice.
Very much. It wouldn't surprise you to say it wouldn't be my choice, but we're obviously different on that particular point. My thoughts on this would be, funding's the answer really with your question, Mike. I mean, the railways consume huge amounts of money as the major roads, as I think was said in one of the presentations. All the councils coming out of COVID did quite detailed work on a bus service improvement plan under the National Bus Strategy. The National Bus Strategy actually sets out a lot of really sensible, good stuff that would radically improve the bus offering in many parts of the country that was implemented. And it's been costed because the councils did that in their original round of bus service improvement plans. They put those asks in for what came out as a fraction of the funding that was requested. To be honest, the funding requested was a fraction of what's spent on the railways, and the railways don't operate all that often at the moment. So for me, I think you could quite easily provide some funding from things like fuel duty rebate, things like national insurance, and kind of gimmicky stuff like that to deliver a lot of that stuff in the bus strategy. The frustrating thing in government is we've got the strategies actually makes a lot of sense for bus services, just haven't actually given any funding apart from tactical stuff to deliver that. So that'd be where I would focus.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. And so many answers. I think what we've seen in Oxfordshire, or in Oxford, especially over the last kind of couple of years, is some really brave local politicians. My hat's off to them indeed, because it's been a really challenging time. But I think we've got to think harder about traffic restriction. We have to be brave around traffic restriction and implementing those tough measures. I think that kind of entitlement of being able to take your motor vehicle wherever you want. We've got to change that. I agree with 20 miles per hour. I think some sort of investment around pavement, improving pavements as well, would go a long way. It all comes down to levels of investment and how we can reprioritise active travel, public transport away from road building.
I think this one's for Pete. I'm very interested in interconnectivity between the various services. Of a certain age, I cycle, I don't have a car, and I've come to see, as I spend a lot of time on the streets waiting for buses and connecting with other forms of transport. So I see a lot of people who are quite frail and of all ages, and also those that have to carry around equipment such as buggies and so on as well. So I think there's a big part of the public transport network that could improve the accessibility and perhaps protect from weather, things like that, which might put off potential users of public transport. There's one particular one which I don't know if anybody's heard about, the upgrades of the train station, the main train station at Antwerp, where they decided that they decided that it was very necessary, as you probably all know, that in the Netherlands everybody uses bikes. They needed to have a really sophisticated form of parking the bikes, because there were going to be many hundreds, maybe thousands of them. So when they did the upgrade of their railway station, central railway station, they made sure that there was underground parking. Everybody had an app, and there they could see where their next space was available. They could get their bike in there, get up to their train, and off they went. And coming back, the same thing. It would remind them where the bicycle was located. Are there any plans to upgrade the cycle parking at the station? Because that puts me off taking my bike down to the station. I don't believe I'll ever find a space, and I'll definitely never find my bike again. And there isn't enough space anyway. So over to you.
Yeah, I think there's a few questions there, and I'll try and address them briefly. I guess there's obviously, even as the Strategic Transport and Highway Authority, we obviously have to operate within the laws. And bus services outside London were deregulated when I was in the first year at university, and rail services were privatised in 1996, 97. So one of our roles is to work very closely with colleagues in both those industry and others to sort of try and join some of those dots together and act as the glue. I've been doing this for quite a while. I think we're actually in a better situation. We're very fortunate in Oxford and Oxfordshire, I think, as was alluded to, in terms of the politicians are quite brave. So integration is key. The reality is, as I say, we're all committed to what we do, whether it's cycling, encouraging walking, buses, rail. But the reality is most people don't do that. And I think about, what prevents them from doing that? Accessibility, information, reliability. It's a whole series of basic issues that we need to work together to address. And we probably need to discuss this in the session afterwards, because we could go on all night. Specifically with the station, because obviously it's a project I worked on most days. The new western entrance, which will obviously a very, very big improvement in terms of providing that facility. We're in very extensive discussion with Network Rail, the train operators and the City Council, and we're just about to finalise parking for that. So I see my colleague Rob from the council, City Council's in the audience, said when it was considered by the planning committee, the suggestion was for 50 Sheffield Sands, which doesn't sound very much, does it? We've actually been having discussions recently about many hundreds of cycle parking spaces on the western side. The longer term plan for the redevelopment of the station, which had involved demolishing the eastern building, we've been talking about wanting 3,000 secure spaces. And in the interim, we've started working in the last week or two with Great Western Railway Network Rail to actually try and make more of the space that's available there, and also basic management issues. Yeah, if people's bikes are rotting away and left there, please remove them. If there's locks left there, remove them, because most of the issues around transport are issues that we all consider they're issues of perception. Why won't you use the bus? So I speak to my neighbours, why don't we use the bus? Because I love going on the electric buses and always going on about them, but the shelter environment isn't great, the information provided isn't great, there's real basics. So again, this is where we try and work with everyone. So the City Council will be doing a new commercial bus shelter contract for the whole of the city. We've supported that, and we've asked that it includes the railway station and the hospitals, because we're talking about health today. The biggest trip generator in Oxfordshire is the hospitals in Oxford. So if we can't do more in relation to buses, cycling, providing rail access there, we're dead. But happy to have a more detailed discussion around Oxford Station, but it's getting better.
Yeah, I've had a bit of input into the new eastern side plans as well, and it's been shown some stuff by Network Rail. I think it's an interesting point you've raised. Because Pete, like Pete says, there's plans to really increase cycle parking, which I totally agree with. I think that's, we need to cater for the policies that we're putting in. So absolutely, if we're saying more people be cycling, we must need to be providing more cycle parking and better cycle parks. So totally agree with that. The big question on the station redevelopment that I encourage all of you who've got a chance to feed into any consultations to get involved in will be how much car parking is needed at the new station. At the moment, the modelling is to retain the parking that's there at the moment on Beckett Street. My view is that's totally unacceptable, absolutely wrong. And as a result of doing that, there's a lot of compromises to the station frontage, how the buses can approach the station, the active travel and walking routes into the station, a lot of compromises caused by car parking. So totally agree, more cycle parking at the station needed, absolutely, and better cycle parking. But what we also need to be saying at the same time is less car parking at the station. There's no justification for that being retained in the size that it is at the moment, and we must push that forward.
If there aren't any other comments from the panel, I think we're sort of wrapping up now, and I think perhaps we'll take up Pete's suggestion of moving to have drinks and continue the conversation over a drink. Just to say, we have been recording this presentation this evening. You'll find it on our website from next week, along with the whole back catalogue of the seminars that we've run over the last years. So do take a look if any of those would be interesting to you. I'd just like to thank the speakers very much, Sarah, Luke, Anna and Pete, for a fascinating discussion. If you're interested to come back to another one, we run these twice a term. The next one is on Wednesday, the 17th of April. That's Wednesday of week one for those at the university. And the subject is going to be the creation of social value in the built environment. So that's really about creating sort of well-being, and that might be environmental, economic, social well-being through placemaking, through the built environment. So it's going to be a really fascinating discussion, a panel bringing different perspectives with discussion as well. So do join us if you're free on Wednesday, the 17th of April. And just before we go for drinks, if you'd like to join me in thanking the four speakers very much for their presentation.